What's the coolest thing about a platypus? Poisonous spike on the back of his ankles!
Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of Peacemaker Season 2, Episode 6. Ignorance is Chris. Joining us today, we have a very special guest. Dan Gvozden is the host of the Amazing Spider Talk podcast. He's also recapping Peacemaker over at decodingtv.com. Dan Gvozden, thanks for joining us today.
I'm thrilled to be here. I wish I could have joined you guys earlier. It just it hasn't worked out time-wise, but I'm excited to talk about this particular episode of Peacemaker with you.
Well, we wanted to have you on the podcast, Dan Gvozden, because we're spoiling Season 2, Episode 6 of Peacemaker. But several weeks ago, I remember the day it happened. I was about to record the podcast with Patrick, and Dan Gvozden texted me, and he says, David, before you record the podcast, did you notice there's no people of color in the Peacemaker alternate universe? And I was like, what? And then I went back and we agreed that that's true. And then you made the prediction that, hey, he's not in a utopia. He's actually in a dystopia. And actually the reason why it's a dystopia is because white supremacy has likely triumphed in some form. And Dan Gvozden, you were right, man. You were right. Bravo. You got it right. Dan nailed it to the point where some people are actually unhappy because you predicted it so exactly how it would play out.
Wait, have you seen that response? I haven't seen that yet.
Very, scattered, responses.
I'll raise my hand a little bit.
Yeah,
I'll raise my hand a little bit.
Look, I'll raise my hand a little bit because I feel like the joy I had of being right. I think is dwarfed by the potential for me being surprised by the end of this episode.
Yeah.
Nailed it. I think the show is written, edited with the presumption that you're probably assuming something is off, but you've not made the connection on why it's off. And I told David this, like, as we talked about, I was like, I think, there's a reasonable chance that does seem right. Seems like something James Gunn would do. He's like, and some people would call that a spoiler. I was like, well, yeah, I'm pretty stupid when I watch things and I tend to be surprised by them and don't put the pieces together. So I'm not going to, I'm not mad, but I think I wouldn't have figured it out before the show wanted me to figure it out. And in watching the episode, it became very clear to me that I am not going to go too far as say I was robbed of something, but watching the show is I actually think had I not known, had the theory not been planted, and then I was watching for it as the show went on, I think I would have been on the show's wavelength of which the show I think clearly, and we can get there, but clearly wants you to be on
right,
having the reveal with the show.
Yeah.
And I probably would have been one of those audience members if I'd watched it in that context.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that because, I think there's still the sort of way that it's revealed in the show, which I think is quite clever. And I still got a lot of enjoyment out of those images, whether it's the flag being spun around and the symbol being on it and the way the neighbors react to Adebayo. I still got enjoyment knowing kind of what was coming. I think half of my notes on this episode when I was, because I'm writing my recap right now, were like, here it comes. So there was still some of that anticipation element. And so I think that still at least maintained for me and the fun of watching that reveal happen. I'm curious if you still had that kind of feeling, because I thought it was really clever, regardless of whether you figured it out or not.
No, it was still extremely fun. Gunn is such an exceptional, filmmaker and creative that even as you're putting, I think at a certain point, even if you weren't onto it in the way that you had pointed out, you're onto something in the show. The audience gets a little ahead of the reveals of the show. And then the flag, just turn the flag. I know something's up, just turn the flag. And so at a certain point around halfway through, I feel like the episode is playing with the audience, give it to me. And it's not quite yet. And then it just ratchets that up as it goes along. Again, it is knowing what the kind of broad reveal is does not rob the fun of the episode. This isn't something where nothing, the reveal is not the entirety of what's enjoyable about Peacemaker, about the episode, about the show. It's more about the nature of the show as opposed to a story where, well, the entire reason you're here is for the spoiler. And once you know that, there was no reason to go on the journey at all. That's not true. I think where I landed was it would have been more fun to have that alongside it. Not that it wasn't fun. It was still a really enjoyable episode, knowing that it was clicking into place just a little ahead of where, some some other people might have been.
Yeah, and I think on that note, Patrick, it sounds like we all enjoyed this episode. It's written and directed by James Gunn. And yeah, the show felt like it was spinning its wheels for a little bit, but we really have wanted to go back to this dimension for a couple episodes, and finally we've returned this episode. No sign of Judo Master, as far as I could tell, by the way.
Where is that guy? Yeah,
very curious what he's doing. But this was an episode that really felt like it delivered on the promise of this whole plot line of what would life be like if things were in an alternate dimension. We can talk about the implications of that momentarily. Let's just talk briefly about some of the other stuff that happens in the episode. So the 11th Street kids go to Vigilante's mom's house to open up the portal again, and Vigilante's basement has all the illicit money and drugs from all the people he's busted. When they open the portal, it accidentally blows a lot of cocaine onto all of them. Meanwhile, Rick Flag can't find Economos, Chris, or Amelia, so he decides to go to Belle Reve Prison. There he meets Lex Luthor from the movie Superman. He needs Lex Luthor to help him find the portal. In return, Flag agrees to transfer him to a facility that doesn't have as many metahumans because Lex Luthor hates metahumans. Now, let's just talk a little bit about this. I gotta admit, it did work on me. It activated that part of my list. It's a very simple plot line. It's not like, oh, wow, they used him in such a smart way. But it did activate that part of my lizard brain that's like, hey, that's the guy from the movie. And I can't believe they got, it's literally the events of the movie directly are impacting what's going on in the show, which is just so refreshing compared to Marvel shows where like literally none of that shit matters. It's like, oh, the movie directly is driving actions in this show. And so it's a level of integration that is probably the quote unquote best it can be. Now, whether that's actually effective, I leave up to the viewer, but I thought it was a pretty solid usage of the character. Dan Gvozden, curious what you thought.
I have very mixed feelings about this. Mm-hmm. And some of it stems from that I don't love Nicholas Holt's version of Lex Luthor in the Superman movie and in here, which may be just a carryover from my knowledge and interest in the character from the comics. I think I'm like out on a lone branch here, that I don't know that like he really carries the level of intellect that I feel like I expect from the world's smartest man in Lex Luthor, but that's just a me thing, and I can leave that aside. As for the integration in like the DCU and how it's all playing out, I agree with you. I think this is really spectacular, and yeah, it's certainly a lot easier when you've had one movie-ish, depending on whatever you count. Whether it's Suicide Squad or Peacemaker season 1 or what have you. It's certainly easier to do this kind of thing, to line up your schedules and with a limited cast and all of that, but it's still impressive that it comes so quickly after, and weirdly like tied in with the release of the name of the next Superman movie with that image. I'm sure people have seen it by now, of Superman and Lex Luthor, in their sort of comic book attire, Man of Tomorrow. And so you get a pretty solid setup here for like why that image might be, whether you know the comics or not. And I can go into that if you're interested. But I think all of that is really interesting. Where I feel mixed about it is I'm still mixed on the sort of like carte blanche control that James Gunn seems to have over this universe. I really like James Gunn's stuff for the most part. He can be a little like,
much,
yeah. But again, like you guys just got done talking about Alien Earth. Like, even if James Gunn is a bit much, like compared to that show, Peacemaker knows exactly what it's about. Mm-hmm. So it may be a bit much around the edges with the details and the jokes and the sort of like teenage boy humor, but the themes are really solid. And so, getting into this back half, like I think some people were worried that the show is going to lose itself with the final 2 episodes. And I still think this episode at 33 minutes in length and doing all the things that it's doing is still padded with James Gunnisms. But it knows what it's about. And I love a show that's full of ideas, but ideas aren't worth anything if you don't actually investigate them or intend to go past any surface level depth with them. That's where you get things like Jupiter Ascending and all of that stuff where it's just packed full of ideas and they just don't fit together. But Peacemaker is a really solid show that, where all the pieces click together. My concern about James Gunn being the figurehead of this DCU is, as good as I think the art is going to ultimately be, like, this show is probably better than any of the Marvel shows that are out there.
Yeah.
But it's certainly not for everybody, like by a long stretch. I wouldn't show probably 50% of the audience of Superman this show. And yet we'll see how consequential it ends up being to getting into Man of Tomorrow. But I just still continue to wonder, like, they gave Zack Snyder, it seemed like, full run to bring his sensibilities to the DC universe and, create a universe on the back of that guy's vision. Like, I wonder if James Gunn will be, I think he's a more appealing figure, but is he still an artist that you want to give this, a very idiosyncratic artist with a very adult sensibility, the full control of the DC universe, and launch an entire $1 billion franchise on the back of that? I'm still really up in the air. And as much as I'm enjoying this, maybe I shouldn't worry about the sort of like capitalist, instincts in the back of my mind, but it's there. And I wonder after an episode like this too.
I think what you're saying is, Dan, more filmmaking by committee is what you're for.
I don't want that.
Less auteurist voices, more filmmaking by. I'm teasing. I know that's something.
Yeah, but how long can he do this?
I know you care deeply about these stories and these stories being successful, and you're like, is this the right guy to do it? So I understand that.
I think he's definitely one of the guys to do it.
Right.
I think he's got a real vision for his part of this, but like putting that James Gunn stamp on everything, like I think I worry would lead to potentially diminishing results because the audience will become wise to, I don't take my kids to see this.
Klepek, any thoughts on the Lex Luthor appearance here?
Well, look, as I think one of the great slept-on shows is Hulu's The Great, which Nicholas Hoult is excellent in, and that is just 2 seasons of Nicholas Hoult just being saying the grossest sexual things out of, like, he's just such a, the way words come out of his mouth are just so delightful, and I felt like he was channeling a lot of his character from The Great in this appearance here, where it's like, great. All of a sudden, Nicholas Hoult gets to be the R-rated version of Lex Luthor. He can like make a joke about like a twink and like a bunch of other like,
right.
Yeah.
James Gunn gets to be his most maximalist James Gunn, like trauma, like sort of self, like in a scene like this, to which was not present in the, the Superman movie will not be present in Man of Tomorrow. And look, if what the consequence to the, I have trouble reconciling. We'll see when the next 2 episodes are up, that James Gunn is calling Peacemaker season 2 a prequel to Man of Tomorrow, and hyping it up in that capacity. And yet, if what that means is Lex Luthor was nice to the government and like got moved to a minimum security facility that he'll be able to escape from, I don't know that I'm not sure that's prequel territory for Man of Tomorrow. And if it's more consequential than that, I took my 9-year-old and my 5-year-old to Superman. It was a little much for the 5-year-old, but she had a really good time. And I can't show my either child like a show that opens alienating the audience or a younger audience with an orgy scene. Like, everything about Peacemaker is alien. It's a very adult show. And so, that's the part where it's tough to say too much because I just won't know until the show is over. If explaining why Lex Luthor got moved to a different facility, that's fine. Like, that's very easy to explain to the audience in a one-liner. But that's not consequential. That's not prequel. And so I'm just very curious to see where it all ends up, because my children will never watch this, but they're going to be hyped as fuck to watch Man of Tomorrow when it comes out in a couple years, especially because they'll be a couple years older, but not nearly old enough to graduate to Peacemaker.
You could see
at
a
the
scenario.
Same time, like, we got Deadpool, which will probably be and Wolverine, which will probably be a major fixture in the MCU. So and that is encouraged. I mean, I think most of that audience is probably not the appropriate age to watch that movie.
I was drunk one time and let my kids watch the first 15 minutes of Wolverine and Deadpool, though, and that was pretty funny to watch them too, because my kids just got off the swear jar, and every time a swear happened, they just made me put $1 in it. $10 in, I was like, we're done. We're not watching any more of this movie.
I like that as a metric for like watching a movie through with kids or not.
Yes.
You could see a scenario where the movies impact the show more than the show impacts the movies. I think that's a where it's like the shows like deal with like a bunch of stuff that happened in the movies, but then like the next movie comes out and it's like, oh yeah, he was moved to a minimum security prison in between movies, and like that's the extent of it.
Who cares, right? Like that thing happened off
right?
Screen. Yeah,
and I think that's a very viable way to do that. That's a very viable way to continue tying these things in together. Anyway, let's talk about what else happens in the episode. The 11th Street kids go to the other universe. Keith finds Amelia while she's going through Chris's things. Keith offers to drive her to Argus. Meanwhile, Economos and Adebayo stay at Chris's house, hoping to intercept Chris. On the way to Argus, Keith comments on how the greatest rock bands of all time, it's a battle between Helloween and the Beatles.
They didn't revolutionize rock and roll the way that Mick, Paul, George, and Ringo did.
Nick.
And there's a few details he drops on it. So first of all, Helloween, I've looked up, is a German power metal band founded in 1984 in Hamburg. By members of bands Iron Fist, Gentry, Second Hell, and Powerful, the band has at times been called one of the most influential European heavy metal bands of the 1980s. End quote. He also says that the Beatles have Mick, Paul, George, and Ringo, implying that John Lennon is not in the Beatles. And I had texted with Dan Gvozden about this, and we're like, does that mean John Lennon was never in the Beatles because he fell in love with Yoko Ono like later on? And I put out there, maybe he was in the Beatles, fell in love with Yoko Ono, and then his contributions were erased from the Beatles. So he's like that photo of Stalin, except it's the Beatles next to him. You know what I mean? And it's gone.
I just imagine his sensibilities didn't line up with the sort of like world that was created.
Yeah, that's also very possible.
In this like Earth X, yeah.
So anyway, Harcourt arrives at Argus, but the original Chris sees Harcourt at Argus getting taken in for cocaine possession. I thought that was a super cool moment when he like walks in and he realizes who she is, because his Amelia or other Amelia is at home, and so they have this moment where they both realize like what's going on, and that was a wonderful moment. I love that. Adrian goes to his house in the new universe. They geek out at each other as they share virtually everything in common, except that Adrian in this universe hates Peacemaker and joined the Sons of Liberty. It does seem as though the Sons of Liberty are the good guys, meaning the thing that we predicted a couple episodes ago where Chris is murdering all those Sons of Liberty in gruesome ways. It's actually going to turn out to be really unfortunate. Amelia and Chris finally confront each other about everything, but aren't really able to come to a full resolution other than that Chris has no interest in leaving. It soon becomes clear, though, that everything is horribly wrong in this universe. This universe's Harcourt sees OG Harcourt and asks the guard to arrest her. Meanwhile, Economos encounters Chris's dad, who promptly stabs him through the hand, and Adebayo decides to go out for a walk, but every white person around her sees her and runs after her, indicating that she has escaped containment. So we are in a white supremacist universe here. Chris finds that the United States flag has a Nazi symbol on it. But the thing I want to dive into here is something that, like, everyone now knows we're in a Nazi universe, but some unique insight that I think Dan Gvozden has brought to this equation is why we're in a Nazi universe. And Dan Gvozden, in your article at decodingtv.com, you laid out your theory for why this is the case. Do you care to expand on that here? Like, why is this a Nazi universe? What is the inciting event that led to this being a Nazi universe, in your opinion?
Yeah, I don't want to take a victory lap until I feel like my full prediction comes true. Like other people, noticed, and good for them. Other people noticed the sort of like lack of people of color in episode 3 of this season, and I was primed for it because I feel like in any fiction, especially one that lays so heavily into destroying the life of its protagonist, a utopia or any easy fix is never what it appears to be. And so I was, extra alert for that kind of thing. Especially given that his father, Augie, is a white supremacist, so like the choice is either Augie, healed himself and has made himself a family man and realized the error of his ways. And I don't know, it's 2025. I'm not really holding a candle for people realizing that their ways are fascist or white supremacist and reforming themselves. I can hope, David and Patrick. But that was kind of the sort of like genesis of me noticing this. But then you start asking, like, okay, like, how does this happen? Is this a sort of Marvel what if style alternate universe where one little change in the past suddenly wrinkles and creates a new universe, or like a dark matter for that matter as well? And there's one key instrumental point, and then like, what's the key instrumental point in the life of Peacemaker? I mean, there's probably two, and they're both fairly similar. One would be the murder of Rick Flag Jr., which is an intentional killing by Peacemaker on behalf of the government. And the other would be the death of Keith, his brother, an accidental killing in his past, which he spent season 1 basically trying to heal himself of let go of the guilt he felt towards that by murdering his father. Right. I not planned murder, but in the moment. And so, you get this season where suddenly he's got his father and his brother back. And he has this perfect, thing here. How does the show then place the blame for whatever bad is happening back on Chris again? Like, everything in the show has got to kind of land on Chris to make his life as miserable as possible, because that's the show we're watching. Like, he's not going to get a clean victory. And so to my mind, I think the more elegant and interesting answer to that question is, what if it was him not accidentally killing Keith that created this universe, right? That ultimately the death of his brother is what saved the planet from becoming a white supremacist utopia. And allowing his brother to live is what ended up where we're at. And, I could come up with any number of rationale, but the cleanest thing to me is, hey, the top trio doesn't exist without Keith, right? And the death of Keith really splintered Chris away from his father, ultimately leading to him, like I said, killing his father. So it makes sense to me that if Keith doesn't die, the two sons of Augie continue to be indoctrinated into this white supremacist thinking, and their metal and powers and intellect and finances and all that stuff combined allows them to become the sort of world conquering top trio that I'm guessing topples the government or whatever it is that is needed to. Maybe they become great designers and they add a swastika and everybody just decides that's a great design. I don't know what, but
basically it's the not killing Keith, and that leads to the family unit coalescing, and then they're able to somehow lead bring about the rise of this Nazi regime. Now,
because we have to imagine that, like, also Augie he has access to that doorway. So and we've seen the Peacemaker helmets. So that technology and the bike and all that stuff is not solely linked to Chris's universe, right?
Yeah.
What happens when 3 guys have access to that and are building on it for decades?
Right. Yeah. And that would be interesting, right? Because then the implication is that there's something inherently bad about his family, right? Like, about Augie and his family, and that, like, it's less about like his relationship, him needing to be there for them, and more that like some family members are toxic and you cannot, there can be no redemption there. And when you try to redeem it, it actually leads to something horrific happening. Patrick Klepek, thoughts on any of the stuff that's been said so far?
I guess I'll be a little disappointed if it's as simple as if Chris, one choice in Chris's life, or one moment of Chris's life, is responsible for like the adoption of the fascist Nazi state of the United States of America, and that the top trio are the ones who actually toppled anything. I
But wouldn't that be very Peacemaker-y to do that?
I suppose so. So.
There have been more bizarre butterfly effects in our real world.
Yeah, I guess I wouldn't put us past the show. I think it's interesting. I'm like curious to know more about like what we'll get from the world building of like this different version of reality, because often when you get, look at the modern Wolfenstein games, right? Like often when you have alt reality, like Nazi takeover of the United States, like when World War II goes, the conclusion of that goes differently. It's like in Wolfenstein, you walk into that game and like the blimps are everywhere. Like the German aesthetic is everywhere. And that's not what this is. Because actually it's like far more insidious. It would be more in line with what Gunn was playing with politically in Superman would be, well, the way that we often like do the alt reality of World War II is that, we lost, they won, they took over. What's like much more likely and what is more in line with our current political moment is we choose to be the Nazis. We choose to be the fascists. No one took over and twisted our arm and said, like, get rid of the blacks as like it's portrayed in the show. It's like, no, that makes sense. We should do that. We vote for that. We choose to go in that direction. And it seems like that's a bit of like where the show is going. And I'll be fascinated to see how much we get of that, because that does seem to line up with politically what Gunn was playing with in Superman, and where Superman I think is like very politically charged, but you can watch it and not engage with it. I think it's interesting when we're talking about the relationship of the films to the TV shows, where does Gunn look at some of these TV shows like Peacemaker and goes like, great, subtext is for cowards. Like I'm like, oh, you didn't read into what I was playing with there. We're just going to put it into the show. And that's kind of a fascinating relationship to have with how you integrate politics and social commentary into your works. And I'm very curious to see how Gunn plays with that through the subsequent 2 episodes.
I agree with you, Patrick, that your assessment would be a more sharp political critique of our current time, and Dan's solution would be a more interesting from a character study perspective.
I think both can coexist, right? Like if Trump doesn't have the Apprentice, right? Like as a media figure, like do we end up in the timeline that we're in, right? If Keith and all them are superheroes and become major figures in this world to the point that there are murals on the wall, right? It can be a creeping fascism that slowly slips in, that's led by them. I jokingly said they topple the state or whatever, but it doesn't need to be that.
Maybe they just encourage this. Right. Maybe they encourage the state, and that's what it is, right?
I mean, we're talking about like John and Yoko and stuff like that. Like a world where the Nazis just won World War II does not line up with this, Wolfenstein wise, because like the one change in the Beatles is a guy, the singer, it's like if the Nazis won World War II, the Beatles wouldn't exist, period.
Rock music doesn't exist without like black creativity. Like, so there are like parts of this world that, again, I don't need to explain. Like, I don't need it to get obsessed with like every little bit of an alternate reality. I can live with that. The line that sticks out with me from the episode though is when like she's walking down the neighborhood and someone says like, one got out.
Yes, that's such a crazy line.
Yeah.
Like that is like I paused the show and went, that might be the most upsetting line.
Yeah.
Like I don't know what the implications are, but I'm not sure I want to find out
soon. I think we're going to find out soon.
I kept waiting for the camera to just pan left and show like a giant cage that had been just out of sight or something like that.
Yeah, it's a very specific line to like put in, like got out.
Yeah.
Even the sort of like Indiana Jones imagery at the end of Adebayo like running from like a line of people on the horizon is so distinct. Yeah.
I mean, for me, the moment that gave me chills was turning the flag and the Nazi symbols on it. And I will just say that there are upsetting parallels between what's in the show and some things that have happened in real life. So, just a very effective show. I can't believe they're going there. I'm really curious if like how upset people will get by this, if at all, like if people are even watching the show. But it is really a bold swing, and clearly we all know. I think we can confidently predict it will be a sharp rebuke of whatever this society is. It will end up being a sharp rebuke of whatever the society is, and so at least I hope so. If it's not, I'm going to be real upset. But I think it's going to be, and therefore, I'm curious to see how people will react to that.
I am curious, this show, I mean, I guess the first season had like a big white supremacist element to it, but I don't think it really dove into those viewpoints all that much, other than to say, like, we're going to model him after like sort of the KKK leaders and stuff. It's been kind of a show that quietly shows diversity, I think, in a way that's felt really natural. The show hasn't like really made race like a key theme of it. And like doing this, suddenly it's like, hey, we're really going to, get into like, I don't know if I would call it racial politics, but I don't think it's a theme that the show has really spent much time on.
They have mentioned it. They've discussed it a little bit in Peacemaker season 1. And they had this conversation about othering Asian people, which I actually appreciated, but things of that nature, right? They've talked about it, but you're right. Like, they are now putting it front and center as, hey, did you notice that like we like the 11th Street kids are like a multiracial, multi-gender sort of egalitarian group? Nope. Well, now you do. And yeah. Anyway,
and to that point, like even the title of the show, "Ignorance is Chris." The whole like season has been about, and this first season too is not really been about, Chris, how Chris treats people of color. That's not been the flaw we've been focused on. But like by titling this episode "Ignorance is Chris" and saying, like, what kind of a person is he that he didn't notice this? Because he's not just watching a show; he's living in this environment. It suddenly made it a rebuke of his character on a topic that we weren't really focusing on. And so, I hope, and I think the show will, really start to unpack, like, why didn't Chris notice this? And that seems like a lot to really get into with 2 episodes left. Though I have faith enough in Gunn that he wouldn't evoke it without having a real plan for how he like wants to unpack it. But I certainly hope these final 2 episodes are longer than like the 33 minutes we got in this one, because there's a lot still to do.
Patrick Klepek, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just glad the show is finally moving. It feels like it's all been waiting for this reveal, and the show is, despite having like pretty truncated episode running times, spinning its wheels. Like even this episode, Dan, you mentioned, like, I love all the vigilante back and forth. Like, it's very funny, but also feels like we need to get over 30 minutes. Also, that character's had nothing to do all season. So it's like, finally, he kind of has something to do, but it kind of feels like here's a little something so we can keep you on the cast.
I don't know. I really thought I love that sequence, because everything is the same until they get to the thing that you think is going to be most the same, which is their love of Peacemaker. And then, there's some really like nice effective moments this episode where they show like how terrible this new place is. But anyway, yeah, sorry, Patrick, go ahead.
No, and I just feel like the characters are finally kind of coming to head to use this multiverse story in the most effective way possible. I have conflicted feelings on Harcourt and Peacemaker kind of getting together in the end, but that scene they have at Argus is like really powerfully played by like both actors, that even if I'd sort of rather see the characters not together, if they do get together, I do think that scene goes a long way emotionally to justifying like the charge between those two. I thought that was some of the best acting, like one of the best scenes in the season between those two in that couple of minutes.
All right. Well, great kickoff for the final 3 episodes of the show. Very exciting to see what comes next. You can read Dan Gvozden's recaps over at decodingtv.com. Dan, thanks for chatting with us today.
It was really fun. I had a great time, and this time I feel like I'm not really in a vacuum talking about the show. I can banter with you guys because I don't know anybody else who's watching this, but I'm enjoying it, and my crazy theories, which end up being right. So this has been a lot of fun.
Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.